Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2021 South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. This is the session titled Child Labor in the Informal Segments of the Supply Chain, Challenges and Way Forward for Businesses in South Asia. I'm Adarsh from Q Design, and I'll be your technical facilitator today. Both the chat and Q&A functions will be on. If you have any questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A function. Please note that the session today will be recorded. If you have any questions about Zoom or require technical assistance, please feel free to privately message me for help. I will now hand over to.
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the co-organizers of this session, that is ILO, Global March and UNICEF, I warmly welcome you to this session on child labor in the informal segments of the supply chain. Now, as we know well, child labor is most prevalent in the informal sector, and particularly in the lower tiers of the supply chain, which is the hardest to reach and the hardest to eliminate. Therefore, that part of child labor needs special attention. Despite challenges, we cannot give up, nor can we relax. It is everyone's business to tackle child labor constantly and constantly look for new ways and means to do so. With the commitment and efforts from all stakeholders, particularly the private sector, the situation has shown signs of improvement, with businesses stepping up their efforts in addressing issue within the supply chains, as well as through their supply chains, to try to reach out to the informal sector to the extent possible. The urgency to eliminate child labor in supply chains is further highlighted by the fact that unlike many other SDG targets, which have a deadline of 2030, elimination of child labor has a deadline of 2025, which is just 4 years ahead of us. And SDG target 8.7 calls for the prohibition and elimination of child labor by 2025. In view of this global priority, the United Nations declared 2021, that is this year, as the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. It is in this context that we are approaching this session. This session will attempt to explore some of the challenges that stakeholders are facing in addressing child labor in the informal sector, as well as to look at good practices and success stories. We have an excellent panel of speakers today, as well as an expert moderator who I will introduce to you shortly. After the panelists speak, we will have the opportunity for sharing thoughts and asking questions. We will invite a few resource persons from the audience to share their thoughts as well. As the panelists speak, if you have any questions, please post them on the Q&A box, and we will try to distribute them and answer to the best of our ability. Now to introduce our moderator, Ms. Purva Gupta is a human rights advocate with a decade of experience in child rights, particularly child labor. She is the global coordinator at the Global March Against Child Labor, and has wide experience in leading and supporting advocacy, research, capacity building, and community participatory interventions across countries on child labor in economic and labor exploitation situations. Over to you, Purva.
Thank you, Insaf. Hello and namaste, everyone. Depending on which time zone you're logging in from, a very good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. I'm very glad to be moderating today's session on this most important topic of child labor in the informal parts of the supply chain for two reasons. It's very relevant for the region for our region, for the South Asia region, where 90% of all business and work is informal. And the second reason that I'm happy to be moderating this is because I feel it's a very timely discussion. The pandemic has only increased the vulnerability in the informal sector, which has implications for increase in child labor. So with that, moving forward, and on behalf of the organizers, I will welcome our session panelists. Each represent important stakeholder groups that have an essential role in the collective fight against child labor. So let's start with our first panelist, Dr. Rinchin Chopal. Dr. Rinchin is the Director General of SAVAC, an intergovernmental body working in the region to end violence against children. He is also a member of the Committee of the Rights of the Child. Dr. Rinchin, so happy to have you here. My question for you is, from your experience, how are governments in the region approaching child labor in the informal part of supply chain? And how can they work better with businesses? And my last question, and how can SAVAC as an apex body of SARC, what can it do to improve collaboration between the different stakeholders such as the business, the governments, and the civil society?
Thank you, Purva, and good evening to all the eminent members of this discussion. I wish you very good evening from Bhutan. I want to acknowledge right at the beginning the organizers of this segment of the overall global discourse. ILO, UNICEF, and Global March. As both Insaf and Purva said, I think, as important as the, business to bring child labor to an end, the time is definitely really not on our side. And therefore, with the magnitude of the problem we are confronted with, I think there is a need for us to reevaluate our own efforts to, deal with this in the, very short time we have. And the UN's effort to declare 21 as the International Year of the International Year to End Child Labor is very welcome, if not a little too late. Responding to Purva's question, as we all know, South Asia is home to some 500 million children, and which is the largest children's population of any region in the world, and also has among the largest number of children engaged in child labor and other forms of exploitation. And SAVAC, as the regional apex body who drives this regional movement to end violence against children, has among its thematic focus areas ending child labor as one of them. And in a region as complicated and as diverse and as polarized as it may be, the effort to drive the regional action plan to end child labor has been one of the biggest breakthroughs we had in the past 5-6 years. And I am still a little concerned that despite the fact that we have a regional action plan on the table, which actually was launched during the 2016 South Asia launch of the SDG 8.7 in Bhutan, brought together by, launched jointly by SAVAC and ILO on behalf of the SDG, SACG, the South Asia Action and Coordinated Group. For the first time, despite all the sensitivities that we had to deal with, we actually brought governments, civil society, UN NGO partners, and more importantly, trade unions, workers' associations, bonded labor federations, and even survivors to the forum, and had a very important, open, transparent discourse. But the reality is still that on the ground, there is so very little we are able to do in terms of creating very effective intervention strategies, particularly to address child labor in the informal sector. And as Purva mentioned, the pandemic has further deepened the challenges. And for SIVAC, the 2020 has been a time to sit with our national mechanism and discuss all the push factors of the COVID pandemic. And child labor, child marriage, sexual abuse and exploitation of children actually became central to the discourse we had. I do believe that we have a lot of organizations working on this on the ground. But nevertheless, the challenge still remains that we are all working in silos. Sometimes, not even able to coordinate or collaborate or create convergence. And also most of the time, not able to do enough to even address targeted approaches. For SIVAC, since 2016, after the regional action plan was launched during the SDG 8.7, we actually tried to take some targeted approaches in partnership with different countries and different partner organizations. So in 2017, we took the challenge of children and child labor in the brick-in industry. We followed that by addressing child labor in the leather factory. And we actually had an interesting breakthrough in Bangladesh, where we had this project by having the leather factory organizers signing a declaration for making the leather factory child labor free. In different countries, we had different approaches. We looked at child labor in the coal mines. We tried to address or highlight issues of child labor in the sun mica industry. We tried to look at also child labor in the carpet factory in Afghanistan. So definitely we tried to bring focus on different, settings where child labor does happen. But I think it is extremely crucial as we move forward in this very compressed time that we have, that we need to continue to work on creating more strategic interventions through convergent strategies by bringing accountability on the governments as well as other stakeholders, including our UN NGO partners who are mandated to deal with this. And SIVAC currently is working with ILO to now try and revisit our regional action plan and to see how the regional action plan can be made much more focused on addressing not just the key issues in South Asia, but also addressing the highlights of the international year, and also driving the SDG 8.7 goals little further down the road in partnership with ILO, with Global March, and our SACJ agencies working in South Asia. So I am hopeful that in this panel discussion, where we have so many eminent speakers, we will be able to come out with some concrete, tangible discourse that can move us, meaningful step forward. And I look forward to working with all of you to do our bit to be able to address elimination of child labor in our region and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rinchin, for pointing out the important challenges in the region with regard to less of convergence and less of targeted approaches, and also SAVAC's efforts to address this challenge in the region. So thank you for that. So now let's zoom out from the region and go to the global experts. So I'd like to invite our next panelist, who is from the ILO head office in Geneva, Mr. Benjamin Smith. He's the child labor specialist from the Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work branch. Hi, Ben, good to see you. So I'm going to call on you to share ILO's perspective on addressing child labor in the supply chain with an emphasis of going beyond the first and the second tiers, and also how effectively can we reach out to the informal part of the supply chain. So looking to hear some good practices and some tools from the ILO. Over to you, Ben.
Great, thank you very much, Purva, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning. It's very much an honor to be a part of such a distinguished panel and to share a bit about ILO's perspective. And I'd like to begin by just giving some figures on the challenge of child labor in supply chains before talking about ILO experience and some efforts, particularly in the informal economy. And then I'll finish by saying a few words about the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. So why does ILO place such an emphasis on child labor in supply chains? And the answer is because of the 152 million children who are in child labor, a significant share of these are in supply chains. So according to some research that we did with UNICEF and other UN agencies, OECD, a couple of years ago, and it varies by region, but up to 26% of child labor can be found in global supply chains. And that's not even counting domestic supply chains. So clearly, we're not going to get to the goal of elimination of child labor without directly addressing this challenge of child labor in supply chains. So to illustrate this, I'd like to share an experience from another region, Latin America, in El Salvador, where some years ago, about 30,000 children were working in sugarcane. So they were harvesting sugarcane using machetes, sharp tools, spraying pesticides, and really during long hours with a lot of heat stress, some of the worst forms of child labor that you can imagine. So ILO initiated a project, and this was to provide education alternatives, income generating options for parents. And this was targeting about 5,000 of those children. Then Coca-Cola company got involved because they were the biggest buyer of Salvadoran sugarcane, about almost half of the sugarcane produced. So Coca-Cola came in and they put pressure on their suppliers and government to do something. And around the same time, there were negotiations for a free trade agreement, and sugarcane was one of the commodities being discussed. So between Coca-Cola getting involved and the free trade agreement discussions, this got the government's attention. And so the government mobilized labor inspectors. The Sugar Association of Salvador also created a group of monitors to go and see what was happening on the farms. Price incentives were put in place, and the result was a drop of over 90% of child labor in sugarcane. So we said, this is fantastic. Let's all take a victory lap. Well, the story is a bit more complicated than that because what we saw was child labor at the same time increased in coffee and in tomatoes, other crops in the nearby area. So this really was a big reminder that sometimes, learning about what doesn't work can be as important as learning about what does work. And for us, and I think we've shared this a lot, it calls attention to the need for area-based approaches to tackle child labor. So preventing, displacement, the shifting of children from one form of child labor into another, from one supply chain to another form of child labor, that I think is a baseline of corporate responsibility when it comes to child labor in supply chains. Another key lesson that I'd like to share that's come up is really, and it's quite obvious maybe, but bears our focus, is the fact that parents need to earn enough in order to be able to send their children to school and to meet basic household needs. So decent work for parents is critical in this discussion. And that includes respect for all fundamental labor rights, including freedom of association and collective bargaining, so that workers, cooperatives, smallholders can effectively defend their interests and secure for themselves a fair share of the value that is created in supply chains. So organizations, organizing workers and small producers and so on into trade unions, cooperatives, small associations can be an important step toward formalization. And I wanted to touch on informal economy as an important dynamic in all this. So we know that the vast majority of child labor does occur in the informal economy, including in supply chains. So it's like informality is a veil laid over supply chains. It blocks the line of sight down the supply chain, and it prevents small businesses from having access to finance and social protection, and outside the scope of labor inspection entirely. So transition from the formal economy from informal to formal economy is key to allow them to increase productivity, expand and provide better working conditions, and ensure that adults can be hired instead of children. So to conclude, I want to return to the idea of learning from what doesn't work as well as what does work. And we know that what may work doesn't necessarily further down and hasn't proved to be terribly useful. So a rethink about child labor due diligence is needed. Conducting impact assessments throughout the whole supply chain, integrating the findings of that into management systems, business practices, making sure that business practices are aligned with commitments on human rights. So looking at price, delivery time, lead times, et cetera. Stakeholder engagement that prioritizes social dialogue with workers' organizations who, by the way, can provide a continual monitoring of the supply chain instead of just a snapshot picture, all very important. But to address the root causes in informality, and this is just my final point on the need to tackle structural causes like lack of education, lack of social protection, business needs to engage with government. This is a government role, of course, but businesses are finding mechanisms to not replace governments, but to support them in addressing these root causes. So nationally determined action plans, businesses can have an important role. And this has to be at the top of the priorities in this space. And with COVID-19, it's more important than ever. So just a final word on the UN year 2021 on International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. It's a chance to mobilize resources, to generate energy, and to give us that acceleration that we need to meet the 2025 targets. So I want to encourage everyone to consider making a concrete pledge for action this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. You shared many good practices from the experience of ILO, the area-based approach focusing on livelihood of adults, decent work, the whole supply chain approach, and most important, which actually leads to the next panelist, is the important role that the businesses have to work with the governments and the other stakeholders to address the root causes of child labor in the informal parts of the supply chain. With that, I call upon Mr. Shankara Govinda. He is the Associate Vice President, the Human Resources and Services Department from Toyota India. Mr. Shankara, welcome. My question to you is that what is Toyota's and the wider business community's experience in addressing child labor in the supply chains, and of course, especially in the lower tiers, and what is expected from businesses, and what do businesses expect from other stakeholders in this endeavor to address child labor in the informal space? Over to you, Mr. Shankara.
Yeah, good afternoon, good evening, namaskara. So I am Shankara Ji, Vice President of Toyota India. So it is great honor to be part of this forum and speak about eliminating the child labor. So taking this opportunity, I would like to share our practice. So I would like to use a small presentation. Is my presentation is visible, Roa?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So let me speak about how we are eliminating the child labor in our supply chain. So is it getting changed? Sorry. One minute.
No, it's not, Mr. Shankar.
No. Yeah, 1 minute. Just again, I have to check. Is it now? No, sorry.
Not yet.
Now it is visible?
It's visible now. Yes, thank you.
So briefly, quickly, I'll explain about our company. So our company's name is Toyota Kirloskar Motor, and we are the joint venture between Toyota and Kirloskar Group. And we are producing all these vehicles in India. So whatever the vehicle we see across India, so manufactured in one location, that is in Bangalore and Karnataka. And Toyota is united as one team, regardless of the rank, in order to contribute to the society, people, and community. And also we show humility for the support of our business by valued stakeholder and the wider society, and also respecting the diversity in the world. So this philosophical, why I would like to explain is anybody can will have a technology equipment, but finally the people makes the difference. So our philosophy is focused towards the people, and we give great importance to the people development. So our mission is producing happiness for all and creating mobility for all is our vision. And this is our supply chain link. As a OE, we are at that center, and we also, our stakeholder is suppliers and also distributors and dealers to distribute the cars to our customers. So first I would like to explain in our company how first we eliminate. So first within our premises, how we manage, then getting into the suppliers, then to the dealers. So coming to our own this one, first of all, we don't recruit anybody less than 80 years, very simple the law. And whoever enters inside the premises, so we ensure the age. So unless otherwise they cross the limit, they will not be allowed inside the factory. Whether it can be a contractor, subcontractor, many kind of contracts, the people will come inside. So we make sure at the gate that nobody will enter less than the 18 years. And coming to our supply chain, first is our suppliers. So even in the suppliers, there are about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, like that, many tires are there. So tier 1 is the major components. Again, tier 2 is the child components. Tier 3 is furthermore child components. So we engage the suppliers who commit for our complying to TKML standards and a periodic check. So we go to each premises. We have hundreds of suppliers, and periodically there is a team within ourselves So they go to the every of our supplier. We check, ensure the compliance. And also we have an association where we make sure we share our practices. At the same time, we expect everyone to follow and also percolate down the line for other tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. Similar way for dealers also, same condition. So dealer adhere to the business ethics and we ensure we have a SOP, and also there is a dealer council to share the practices, and periodically meet, we visit, and we ensure. But these are all what I can say is all a reactive approach. So only we are immuning ourselves that nobody comes inside, but this will not solve the child labor issue. So the root cause for the child labor is either the poverty or availability of quality schooling and customs and tradition. So our approach is not exactly only reactive, but more of proactive approach in managing or eliminating at the root level, so that actually we can ensure the child labor free environment. So what we have done as a first step is within our premises, we have a school. This school basic purpose is, normally we done a survey, almost 40% of the people, children's, after their high school, especially in India, up to 10th standard. So even though they are meritorious, almost 40% will drop out because of they will not have money. So economically challenged, but meritorious. So for such kind of students, so we opened a school where it's a residential school where people, the students will come here, study, and they'll become a best world-class technicians. So similarly, same thing is extended even for the technicians who got the education. They will not be employable. So again, they'll drop out. So how to make them equipped with the technical skills? So we have tied up with many institutes so that actually we can contribute for dropout from the institutes. But more bigger than that is the much at the lower or grassroots level, the school itself, infrastructure. There are no schools. The people cannot afford to go the stay books or educational material. So we are now already reconstructed the 11 government schools, and right now 2,300 students have benefited. And also we are committed to distribute the basic necessary requirements for the education of the children's, books, stationery, everything to all the children's. And also we are creating the model schools in and around and across the country. And another root cause we found is the people, especially the girl children, dropout is mainly because of the hygiene and sanitation facilities in the schools. So we are committed to develop that, and we have developed in 293 schools, and almost 50,000 students got benefited out of this. And also we have the behavioral change program so that we can improve the hygiene and sanitary practices across the country. And another root cause we found was the malnutrition, anemia, and health issues. So towards this also we are engaging, or we are coming out with many activities. So finally, in a nutshell, only the two things I would like to summarize. One is ensure the child labor is not permitted in our supply chain with a lot of firewalls, the systems, SOPs, and the physical verification. And second is focus on the root cause and develop the measures so that it does not lead towards the child labor. So this is what is our approach. So thanks for giving me opportunity for sharing our practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shankara, for sharing Toyota India's efforts, and especially the proactive approach in addressing the root causes that can lead to child labor. Thank you. I call upon now our next speaker, Ms. Amanda Bisex. She is the Regional Advisor for Child Protection from the UNICEF Regional Office for South Asia. Amanda, I would like you to reflect upon how child labor, and especially in the informal supply chain, is based within the broader system of child protection and child rights that the UNICEF uses and promotes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. And let me just start sharing my screen. Okay, thank you. And I think that was a very good segue from the previous presentation and Mr. Shankar into this issue, because I think, addressing child labour from a holistic child protection approach is really a framework we need to be thinking of both in the formal and the informal sector. And I would just like to sort of start by looking at the normative framework that we have to address the issue, which is very strong. So we, of course, have the magnitude of the issue in South Asia is very extreme. We have around 41 million children who are engaged in child labour, and a proportion of those are in hazardous child labour. So it's something we need to really take a holistic approach to if we're really to address these numbers. And we have that in the normative framework and the legal framework. So we have the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which has a specific optional protocol actually on hazardous forms related to child prostitution and child pornography. But of course, we also have the ILO conventions, and we have the Sustainable Development Goals. And within the Sustainable Development Goals, we have a specific target on elimination of child labour. And all governments in the region have signed up to these, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the SDGs as well, and are working towards implementation. We also have the regional normative frameworks, and thank you to Dr. Rinchan who has highlighted these. And we have those within the framework of both SARC and SIVAC, and looking at how we can strengthen those commitments and keep those commitments moving forward. And I think what's particularly relevant for this discussion actually is we have the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which was actually unanimously adopted at the Human Rights Council. And the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights really speak about government's duty to protect and businesses' responsibility to respect human rights. And it also talks about how business needs to contribute to human rights through processes and introduction of due diligence. And I think we heard a little bit of that from the previous speaker and Toyota and how they do that. But that includes having incentives also for companies to have sustainability and systematically address the root causes. In terms of the child protection system and how we address within that child labour, I think Mr. Chakra already highlighted some of the root causes of child labour. But we like to, if you look at the sort of the left-hand diagram, we really situate children within their environment and address them within that environment. So we need to also be looking at vulnerabilities that children face and the interconnectedness of the factors and drivers of child protection vulnerabilities, which include child labour, but will also be other child protection vulnerabilities that a child may face. So this, some of the drivers of this include poverty, it includes violence at home, lack of access to quality education, lack of access to legal identity and birth registration are some of the examples of some of the drivers for child labour and child protection vulnerabilities. And recognising within this the role of parents and family and community, as well as the broader macro implications, so the socio-economic implications on children. And within that, developing a child protection system that can address in a holistic way these vulnerabilities. And this system that we talk about is looking at prevention and response approaches. So prevention focuses on all children and all risks rather than focusing on silos or issues in isolation of each other. And it promotes thinking and acting holistically when addressing an issue and focuses on both the child, the family and the community, as well as macro level issues such as laws and policies and economic hardships. Response, when we talk about a child protection system, is responding to actual risks or harms that children may experience and ensuring that children have access to specialised services. So for example, children who are involved with hazardous child labour, ensuring they have access to social welfare services, to counselling, to reintegration services if they are removed from that hazardous situation. And what's really important is we look at a comprehensive approach. So we need a robust legal and policy framework. We need effective and enforced regulations, services that are accessible, and these include, social welfare services, but also broader social protection services, access to, for example, income support or access to education. We need coordination because the child protection system brings together many players across different fields, education, legal system, that sort of thing. And we need investment of financial and human resources. And what's really important is the partnerships. And I just want to say here, we talk about government business collaboration, which is essential to ensure that company action is integrated and working collaboratively with government to address issues of child labour and not in a silo. And so in terms of just reflecting on a few key issues on the role of business in ending child labour, there's many actions that businesses can take. And we know that we're finding in South Asia that actually when it comes to hazardous child labour, it's mostly in the informal sector. So the worst forms of child labour are found in the informal sector, and we really need to address that as a priority. And so these are some of the areas we can work together with businesses. And I would just say it's important for business to shift the approach from addressing child labour from a reactive kind of top-down approach, but more and compliance, but more on a sort of leveraging and preventative approach. Yeah, so I think, you know, preventing is the best thing, and working from sort of the root causes and working with the smaller suppliers and the informal sector to help them and support them to ensure that you know, child labour is eradicated and that we have a protective approach and a protective response to child labour. And then just to say that UNICEF is quite engaged in this issue, and we have a number of resources that are available to support businesses, and please do reach out to us should you want any support or guidance. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and especially for pointing out some key ways in which the businesses can be involved and the role that they can play in this important issue. I now call upon our fifth panelist from the ground, I like to say. She's Miss Christine Nathan, from the working committee member of the Hind Mazdoor Sabha, India. She's representing the workers' side. Christine, I invite you to share the experiences of the trade unions and of the workers group in addressing child labor in the supply chains in the lower tiers. And would love to know any best practices that you have come about in your experience, and also suggestions of how workers and businesses and NGOs and other stakeholders can effectively work together.
Thank you, Purva. The topic for child labor in the informal segments of the supply chain, challenges and way forward for businesses in South Asia. First of all, greetings from the trade unions, that is Hind Mazdoor Sabha, to all the sisters and brothers present here, and a very good evening from Mumbai. I'm based in Mumbai. Today, the topic is of high importance because child labor is one of the biggest human rights abuses in the South Asia region. It is a huge problem, and I'm glad this forum rightly recognizes this issue. I would like to thank the ILO and the organizers to focus on this issue. The particular attention on considering ways to eradicate child labor in the supply chain is certainly the need of the hour. Work carried out in the supply chain, and particularly where work has been subcontracted, falls mostly in the informal economy, which I said earlier. At the outset, let me emphasize that there is a major role here, with the trade unions say, to be played by the government, the employers, and the trade unions. If the governments in the region are serious to fulfill the SDGs on child labor, I think we need to work together with the social partners, that is unions and the employers too. In my short presentation, I would like to focus on how trade unions address these issues, share some good practices, and how unions engage with business and NGOs. I would also like to focus here on two other areas, that is empowerment and governance. Empowerment is about a lack of power balance when children are sent to work by their parents. Workers are the weakest in society in terms of economic power. poverty and unemployment by adults force them to send their children to work. This is what we have always been discussing about. It is about poverty and the high cost of education that forces parents to send their children to work. The powerful, the business, dictate terms on who can be employed and under what conditions. This is the power imbalance that the unions always talk about. Empowering the adult workers and children, yes, we say, can eradicate child labor. The trade unions always have conducted training programs, awareness programs on these issues, and very often we also hear the employers also conduct such programs for their medium and small scale sectors. The trade unions would now like to be able to organize these workers into trade unions, the adult workers, where they can freely carry out collective bargaining and where they can have decent work and wage conditions. There are no children in child labor. Have we seen child labor in an enterprise, like our colleague from Toyota mentioned, where it's an organized sector, where workers are organized? No. These rights to organize and carry out collective bargaining in the South Asia region is very poor, which we all know about. Just look at the number of workers who are organized in this region, and particularly in the informal sector. This tells us the situation and the rights of the workers in the informal economy. There is hardly any unions in the informal economy where we have most of the subcontracted workers. Subcontracted workers in many places work out of their homes, where we all know hardly any laws apply, and the workers, the work, and the children are largely invisible. The other area I would like to bring here is the issue of governance. Governance for us in the trade unions is about the laws and machinery established by the government to promote and protect the rights of the workers and protect the rights of the children. It is great to recognize that the ILO Convention on Protection of Children has universal ratification. This means that all countries in the world have ratified the convention, including countries in South Asia. But the problem, what we lack here, is appropriate laws and regulation to implement these conventions. Despite the ratification and the laws, South Asia has the highest number of child labor, which has been mentioned by the earlier speakers as well. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has further increased poverty and increased child labor. We must together, as the tripartite partners of workers, employers, and governments, join hands together and approach governments to seriously enforce laws that allow rights of workers to join unions and carry out collective bargaining. My question is, where are the cases where employers have been identified and disciplined who employ child labor? Today in India, where is the labor inspection who can seriously look at inspecting workplaces? Because under the revised laws, the self-inspection simply gives full freedom to do whatever the employers want. Unless the authorities are serious about this issue, we will have a great struggle to bring down child employment. This is also about governance and the lack of it in the supply chain in all industries. If the authorities are serious to eradicate child labor, the government should seriously consider holding tripartite discussions in good faith. Together with employers and unions, decide on appropriate laws, including punitive measures that will deter employers employing children and ensure proper implementation of the law. At this point, let me quickly give you two cases where trade unions have been working very hard on addressing these challenges. In the brick kiln section, entire family is employed where the father, the mother, and the children are made to make bricks, 1,000 bricks, either produced individually or together. The parents bring the children to work so that the work is done faster. Most of these parents are under bondage. So we're also bringing us to the issue of Convention 29 on forced labor. The unions while working with this group started classes for children in the evening and had awareness programs for parents too as to why they should not bring their children to work. By and by, the workers were organized in trade unions and collective bargaining was held, where the wages of the adult worker were increased and parents allowed their children to join the evening classes. The union linked the NGO to provide creche at the workplace facilities at the workplace along with the children. So here, following this, the next collective bargaining, the employer provided the creche himself. The work of the union was going on in the right direction because here we identified a role for the employer, a role for the NGOs, and the role for the trade union. Coming quickly, in Saharanpur, which is known for wood carving, children were employed to do intricate work and inlaying work decorating the furniture. This had a bad effect on the children. They had nimble fingers, they lost their eyesight, and their backs were rounded. And due to constant sitting posture, they soon became handicapped and were thrown out of the house by their parents, where they then turned into beggars, drug peddlers, etc. The union not only started awareness programs, but also started night school for the children, along with skills training program. So sooner or later, these small children who are already workers at this young age will have specialized skills and be able to bargain for better wages and working conditions. The case study is pretty long, but I will stop here due to lack of time.
Thank you so much, Christine, for highlighting a very important gap that does exist, which is lack of unions and lack of protection for the people in the informal sector, and also for sharing the efforts of the trade unions in this regard. So continuing on with the discussion, I'd like to invite a few interventions from the floor. These are experts and resource persons. I'll like to invite them to share their experiences. First, would welcome Mr. Sudhir Katyar. He is the project director for Prayas Center for Labor Research and Action. Mr. Sudhir, I invite you to share about your experience of addressing child labor in the informal sector. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Purva, and good evening to all the participants in the seminar. Center for Labor Research and Action works with informal sector workers in Gujarat mainly, construction, brick kilns, agriculture, and also parts of the cotton chain, supply chain, cotton ginning industry, for example. And we have come across incidents of child labor, significant incidents of child labor in all these sectors, except probably construction, where it is much less. In fact, in some sectors, the whole work process depends on child labor, like cotton seed pollination, a particular agriculture process, where majority is the children only who are working in the cotton seed pollination sector. One issue that comes across is that the child labor incidence gets highlighted in global supply chains, especially when there's a Western market. In domestic supply chains, it hardly comes up. Very rarely it comes up, and it's not much of an issue at all. Then there's a major issue of child labor where the child is working with the family. In fact, my previous speaker, Mrs. Nathan, she's talked about brick kilns where children are coming with their families. So there are many other schemes as well where children migrate with their parents, like in agriculture, sugarcane harvesting, for example, quarrying, the whole family migrates. And she talked about the interventions. She said that we open schools, schools have been opened, work site. But the fact is that we realize that parents themselves make maximum efforts to leave their children behind and enroll them in schools. If they have some family support at home, they prefer to leave their children behind so that they can be enrolled. Every parent wants his or her child to be studying. But the problem is the collapse of public schooling system. The child, even if he's enrolled in a school, in a government school, after 10 years, it comes out that he's hardly done anything. He's functionally illiterate. So this collapse of public schooling system in India, I would say it's a major root cause of child labor because government schools are not functioning. And we have a dual schooling system where the children of the better off people, they study in private schools, and the children of the poor, they go study in government schools, where very little teaching takes place. And it's a structural issue in the sense that it's not a question of putting in the resources or improving model schools. I'm really very happy when Mr. Shankar talked about root causes and identified education. But I would say it's not an issue of setting up some model schools. It's an issue of mindsets. This social structure in India, where the working classes have been denied education for a long time. So unless we change that mindset, and unless children also, unless we have a single schooling system, common schooling system, where everybody, all the child are treated at the same level. We don't have one school for a rich person's child and one school for a working class child. I don't think we can really improve much, because right now what we're witnessing is we work across many sectors, and most of these sectors comprise of young workers, and almost 80%, 90% workers are functionally illiterate. So we have, so that is the situation, that the young generation is functionally illiterate. Talking about our own experiences in tackling child labor, we worked extensively across this cotton seed stream, where when we studied it in 2006-07, there were almost 1 lakh children being trafficked from South Rajasthan tribal area to North Gujarat cotton seed farms. And there was first of all, we studied it, we brought out, documented properly, it was disseminated, and there was a big campaign against it. It was campaign was joined by National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, state governments, media, and it created an impact. But you see how the industry reacted. So what has happened over a period of this last 14-15 years is that the production has got shifted from North Gujarat to tribal farms in South Rajasthan and in North Gujarat. So children are not migrating anymore. Children are not migrating anymore. So there's no child migration, there's no child trafficking. Instead, they're working on their own farms or in the same village. Child labor has continued. So that is the situation. So I would suggest that yes, unless we go down to the root causes and tackle them simultaneously with direct measures, it will not improve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sudhir. You've pointed two important areas to work on when we are addressing this issue. One is also the issue with regards to migrants and migrant children, and the other is also with regards to education and the school systems. I now invite Munira Sultan. She's the National Project Coordinator for Child Labor from ILO Bangladesh. Munira, please share your experience from Bangladesh with regard to this sector. Munira, you're on mute. You're not audible to me. Just give us a moment. I'm reaching out to our technical team. So Munira, we'll come back to you. In the meanwhile, we'll go to the next speaker, Ishani. So Ishani is the Child Protection Specialist from the UNICEF Regional Office for South Asia. Ishani, please share some perspectives from your work.
Okay, thanks, Purva. I just want to focus on what the previous speakers have said in terms of adopting a whole of supply chain approach in the work that we do to end child labor. And I'll talk about two key points. The first is that we know in South Asia, there are 5 top exporting industries where the risk of child labor in the supply chain is quite high, right? And these industries are the apparel and textile industry, the agriculture industry, the wholesale and retail industry, transport and storage industry, and the food production industry. And of these industries, like what the other speakers have said, we know that it's in agriculture where child labor or children who are in child labor is the highest. I will come back to this point later, but the second point that I want to highlight is that in the child labor in the supply chain is linked to three key dimensions. So the first is the gaps in the implementation or the enforcement of statutory legislation and access to justice, which then leaves room for non-compliance. The second, which everyone again has spoken about, are the socioeconomic vulnerabilities of children who are in child labor and their families, which is what the root causes are, as both Mr. Katiyar and Ms. Nathan mentioned. And finally, the third one is the business environment and also the practices of different businesses. So from UNICEF's point of view, we work to address all three dimensions. And when we do work, we work in partnership. So we have different sectors within UNICEF where we work to address these issues, advocacy and communications on the first point of implementation of legal legislation, social protection and child protection to look at the vulnerabilities, the socioeconomic vulnerabilities of children and their families, and then work with the business for human rights sector to look at businesses and the work that they do to make sure they are in line with human rights principles. So this collaboration within the sectors at UNICEF is done also with other partners. So like what both speakers before said, governments, trade unions, other businesses, civil society, academia. And I think the importance of all these actors coming together highlights one key message, that ending child labor is actually everyone's business, and it's not just any one particular actors. And now I want to come back to what we as individuals can do to end child labor. And this is where I want to go back to the first point where we spoke of I mentioned the 5 top industries. So as individuals, as consumers, we know that in the society, we consume products which come out of these industries, right? So whether it's the apparel industry or whether it's the food production industry, we are consumers. And I think therefore, we have an onus and a responsibility to make sure that when we consume, we are aware of some of the industries and some of the businesses within the industries who do promote ending child labor. And then we must also play a role in having our voices heard so that these businesses which are making an effort are promoted, and we advocate them as good practice so that other businesses can follow suit and hopefully achieve the goal that we have set for ourselves of ending child labor by 2025, and definitely by the end of 2030 when the SDGs should be completed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishani. I believe that Munira's audio is now working. Munira, over to you to share your perspective.
Am I audible now? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. A very warm greetings from Bangladesh, especially when the country is having, its week-long 50th year of independence celebration and upgradation to a middle-income country. Let me first thank you quickly, because I can't help thanking the organizers for organizing this very timely felt dialogue on the issue. In fact, I attended an event yesterday supported by the same donor or the host here, Global March, and the issue was quite similar, child laborers working in supply chains, especially in the informal sector. And so I got the opportunity to have a glimpse of the fresh opinions and views of a wide range of stakeholders. So there were serious concerns were raised on different issues. I would like to share with you one such instances, which is the government has very recently, in February, has declared the export-oriented leather, finished goods, and footwear industries as child labor free. And obviously the government and employers are taking this credit of accomplishment, which they should do. But however, there is a serious concerns from the NGOs who are working with the hundreds and thousands of child workers who are working in small factories who produce goods especially for domestic markets. So they are facing difficulties and challenges on the face of the reports and press conferences by the government that this sector is child labor free. Of course, there is a tricky wording. I mean, I would not say tricky, but this is the reality. I mean, export oriented. But under the coverage of this, press and reports, that the whole issue is challenging, facing a challenge. So I would really like to humbly request, if time permits, Dr. Renchen, who was speaking, in fact, on this issue of leather factories in Bangladesh, to share his thoughts on the issue. And secondly, I would like to quickly touch upon another issue, which is the issue of course, child laborers who are working in the informal sectors. But often it was said by one of the panelists that they are not organized, even there are no associations to work with. So in these circumstances, the majority of the children who are working in these, I would not say only Bangladesh, I can imagine and we all know the same similar picture in all of the South Asia. So it is very difficult to work with, our regular employers, constituents bodies like the employers federations and associations, because they are not ready to take the responsibility of the informal sector. Obviously, their members are from for big factory owners and export-oriented factories, so they are not ready to take this responsibility. So in these circumstances, or in this context, I would say I would really like to hear from the Vice President of Toyota and what he thinks on the issue and what he thinks on the scope of CSR on tackling this issue. And I would really like to congratulate him for what they are doing to eliminate child labor from supply chains. And I would really also like to know from him that since Toyota has a big business in the whole of South Asia, do they have any plans to replicate what they're doing in India, like the skills schools for children or any other CSR in this region? Thank you.
Thank you, Munira, for sharing your perspective and also opening the way for question and answers. So Munira, your first question is for Dr. Renchen. Over to you.
Thank you, Munira. And I am also aware about what is going on in terms of the media dissemination related to the leather industry and products being child labor free. The work we did in terms of targeted approach as part of operationalizing the regional action plan to end child labor in partnership with ILO and the government of Bangladesh, the leather factory owners, and SIWAC's civil society organization, the NACG, the National Action and Coordinating Group to End Violence Against Children. We did, including with the academia in Bangladesh, we actually took this up with the Hazaribagh leather industry. And after over a period of 6 months plus of advocacy and working together with them, and also looking at the ground situation, the Hazaribagh Child Labor Free Declaration was signed. That happened in 2017 towards the later part of the year, and unfortunately since then we have not been able to really follow up on this due to various reasons, including resource constraints. But I'm now trying to pick it up again to assess what is going on based on what is happening in the country. So there has been some effort to intervene in making the industry child labor free, but that was only a small part of the industry that we were able to target. But I'm not in a position to clearly say what is the situation now. But definitely some tangible interventions were made, some efforts were made, which brought different sectors, government, civil society, UN NGO partners, including the industry, business sector together.
Thank you, Dr. Rinjin. Now the next question Munira posed was actually for Mr. Shankara. Mr. Shankara, over to you to respond to Munira's question.
Yeah, thanks for Munira, for your question. So two things I would like to clarify. The one is Toyota is working in each country. So each country, the issues are different. The root cause for the child labor it varies from country to country, but the approach is common. So whether it's in Asia or worldwide, so wherever our presence is there, so the practices are similar, or it may be in a different way we are carrying out in each country. And one of the another panelist spoke about the model schooling, why we should, is it necessary or focus is required on model school. So we believe in two things. Any education for the children's, it is not in terms of only quantity. So both quantity and quality is required. So maybe having the many infrastructure for educating the children's, at the same time quality education, so that actually they can become really resourceful people, for the resourceful citizen for the country. So that is the reason why that focus is for the model schooling. So I hope I answered the questions. If any clarification is there, and further I'll take it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shankara, and also thank you so much to all the panelists and all the resource persons. This has been an interesting discussion. We discussed different challenges on the ground to address the issue, as well as good practices with colleagues sharing from their different areas of work, and also the roles that the different actors can play. One thing is clear, that there is, which is coming out from everyone's, everyone's remarks, is that the issue is huge. It is timely and pertinent for us to work on it. And the only way is to work collectively and support each other, and addressing the root causes of child labor. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Insaf, the session host, for the closing and the final wrap up.
Thank you very much, Purva. It was indeed a wonderful session, very insightful interventions from all the panelists, as well as the resource persons who spoke from the floor. I mean, a lot has been shared, a lot to do, and a big challenge ahead of us. But with this level of commitment and insights, I am sure we should be able to make a breakthrough, a positive, a concrete outcome by 2025, or even by end of this year, which is the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. Now, speaking on that, I would like to share a little bit on what the Alliance 8.7, which is a global alliance that brings together governments, UN agencies, civil society organizations, NGOs, academia, workers' organizations, and employers' organizations, importantly, together to the Alliance has launched a series of programs, exciting initiatives to make sure that we make the maximum, we make the most out of this year, and make sure that what we achieve in this year becomes sustainable and concrete. So give me a moment to share my screen, and then Okay, so I hope the screen is visible. Yeah. One of the important mechanisms that has been initiated is the action pledges. The Alliance 8.7 calls for action pledges from a variety of organizations, individuals, businesses, civil society organizations, and even individual members of the public to make action pledges. Because what is key is the actions that we take. We can develop policies, we can enact laws, but all that is needed, but ultimately the change comes with action. So that is where this year, the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour, focuses to the extent possible on action. Now, for this, I'll take you through the website that has been created to share information and share experiences and make your action pledges visible through this website. The website is endchildlabour2021.org, endchildlabour2021.org. So when you enter this website, you have the overview, the tab on child labor, and the tab on take action. Let me click it for a moment. And we go to this short video, which tells about the action pledges.
Kids have wild imaginations. Their laughter can light up a room. They love to explore, play, and discover. Everyone has the right to a happy and safe childhood. That's why the United Nations has declared 2021 the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. Starting now, we're asking regions, countries, organizations, and individuals to join our mission to end child labor by making a 2021 action pledge. This commitment is the first step in our three-pillar strategy. Act. Choose a specific action that contributes to ending child labor. Inspire. Share your journey through stories and experiences. Scale up. Build upon your experience with fellow changemakers. Each action pledge will pave the way to ending child labor by 2025. Are you ready to submit yours? The deadline is 30 March. For children everywhere, let's get started. Together, we can make a difference. Visit endchildlabor2021.org or email us at 2021@alliance87.org for more information.
Yeah, so the action pledges, when I go to the bottom of the website, you have this tab called Submit Action Pledge. But what is an action pledge? It is a statement by a country, by an organization or a regional body, a business, an individual, a civil society organization, any entity, on a concrete affirmation that what they will do to promote, to eliminate child labor, to contribute for the elimination of child labor. Now, individual action is possible, organizations, countries, etc. Now, when it goes to the details, there is also a practical guide that has been developed to guide us on how to make pledges, what type of language to be used, how it can be measurable, how it can be scalable. and how it can be actionable. And the important thing is also how it can inspire others, yourself, and others towards action. Now, the practical guide can be obtained from this link here, which I'm clicking now. The practical guide. It can be read on the screen, or if you wish, you can download the practical guide and go through it. It takes you through the details of it. If you are a regional body, if you are a country, a government, if you are an organization, whether it's a business or a civil society organization or a workers' organization, employers' organization, etc., or if you are an individual, each entity can act, can inspire, and can scale up. So I invite all of you, all of us, to make a concrete pledge, which is actionable, which can inspire ourselves and others, and which can be scaled up. We don't have a lot of time. The deadline is 30th March, and we hope that all organizations, all individuals, all of us will make concrete pledges towards taking action. As said in the video, together we can make a difference. So with that, I would like to thank our panelists, our guest speakers, the resource persons who intervened from the floor, and our moderator, who together brought a wonderful session to us with a lot of insights, new information, and action points to take home. Most of all, I would like to thank the audience, the participants of this session, as well as my thanks go to the Asian Business and Human Rights Forum, the organizers of the conference, for facilitating this session. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a very good rest of the day, wherever you are. Thank you very much, colleagues. Bye.